Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar here with HYCU. The title is Decoding the NIS2 Directive for Atlassian Cloud, What You Need to Know. For those of you who are just joining us, we're going to give you a couple of seconds for everybody to get a coffee and to get settled. So stay tuned. We'll give you 30 seconds to a minute, and then from there, we'll get started with today's discussion. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Welcome, everybody. We're thankful for your time and your attention. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we move forward. This session will be recorded. The slides will be available for you after. You will receive an email with the on-demand recording, an MP4 file, and the slides that we are using themselves. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. So go to the Q&A function in the panel on top or below your Zoom screen, and you will be able to answer or ask any question that you think is important. We will make sure to address any question that you have, whether via chat or live at the end. So if there's a couple of questions right at the end of the presentation that you finally thought through and wanted to ask, we will make sure to answer them live. If for some reason we are bombarded with hundreds of questions, we will make sure to address them via email and make sure that you have answers to any question that you have for today. So with that being said, just as a reminder, Q&A, not the chat, and you will be able to get an answer to any question. With that, let's talk about the matter at hand, the NIS2 directive. And a lot of the focus that you're going to see today is really an understanding of the directive itself and how it particularly affects your applications on Atlassian Cloud. But everything that we're covering today is applicable across every other SaaS application and every other cloud service that you may have in your organization. So we will make sure to make some parallels here, but the real focus is going to be on Atlassian Cloud. Just for quick introductions, my name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Director of Product Management here at HYCU. And when we thought about this topic and we knew how important it was, we wanted to make sure that we brought true subject matter expertise. We understand the product, but it's critical to have somebody to understand the legal frameworks, the compliance directives, and what NIS2 really is. And for that, we brought in Uroš Žust, who's a partner in IT assurance and advisory at Mazars. And Uroš will introduce himself shortly and really be the star of the show, really explaining what NIS2 is, its impact, and who it's for. So with that, just a quick covering of the agenda. We're going to go over the fundamentals. What is NIS2? Who is affected? We're going to understand the requirements, not just in the context today of data protection, but really across the board. And then we will focus on the role of backup and disaster recovery. And the particular focus that we're going to have is actually on your role as a SaaS user. What is the difference between data center server and Atlassian Cloud, and what does that responsibility look like, and how does it relate to NIS2? And then we'll go over how HYCU will be able to help you address that. If we have time, we'll do a rapid fire demo, especially if there are requests for it, but if not, you can have a demo immediately after the conversation. And as mentioned, all questions are welcome. Please use the chat, and we will address all of the questions at the end of the session as well. So with that being said, let's get started. The focus now really is going to be an introduction into NIS2. And with that, we're going to have Uroš introduce himself, and we're very thankful for his time and attention today. So Uroš, off to you.
Hi, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Can I just get a confirmation on that?
Yes.
Okay. And I see we also have a first raised hand. So maybe before we start.
I think it's a glitch. I think sometimes people accidentally press it.
Okay.
And you go from there, yes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, so about me, Andy already said the main things. I am an IT assurance and advisory partner in Mazars. I am based in Slovenia, in charge of the Adriatic region, but kind of helping and working with all the other Mazarses in Europe. My main expertise is IT audit. I've been an IT auditor for over 19 years, but I've kept adding on similar subjects like cybersecurity and mostly compliance, because as we know, there's a lot of regulations and acts coming, especially in Europe. The European Union is very active on this matter. So there's new stuff coming, and there's a lot of things to be done here. Now, just generally, I'm not going to read through my certifications. I like to joke about it to my colleagues that I'm just really good at taking tests. But other than that, I'm very pleased and thank you for inviting me. And I'm hoping that I can bring the perspective both from the European view and also from somebody who actually works in the US, because I've spent 5 years working on US clients, on SOX clients and stuff. So I've kind of seen both worlds in practice. Now, if we move and we start with the introduction, the main idea, maybe I should also say that this presentation is a little text heavy for my typical presentations. Why? Because it's meant to provide you with the summarized key information. As we said, the slides will be shared with you later on. And I wanted to kind of have this as a summarized document with the main critical information. This is why I'm also citing certain articles so you can go and check and you know what is applicable, because the whole directive is pretty long and pretty heavy to navigate through. So basically, what is behind the development of NIS2 directive? Well, it's the NIS1 directive, right? And the fact is that NIS1 directive, while implemented in 2016 and being a definite step in the right direction, it was pretty soon clear that it has certain shortcomings. The first one, the obvious one, was the main goal was not reached. It provided insufficient level of cyber resilience, which was the main idea of why the directive was implemented anyways. Then the implementation was varying greatly between member states. What do we mean here is it showed that it's not clear and concise enough. Because I will give you an example. I come from Slovenia. We have 2 million people. We noticed that subject to NIS1, we estimated that there's about 60 companies in Slovenia that are applicable to this legislation. Now, Finland is not that much bigger than us. We're talking about 2 to 3 times. However, they identified 11,000. So you can see there's a huge discrepancy. And this is where NIS2 is trying to be more clear on like, hey, we want to get everybody on the same basis, kind of set the same baseline for the countries. Then some key sectors were skipped. There was no joint crisis response, and this became more obvious with a few events that happened in the recent times. One of them being the whole COVID pandemic, who nobody saw coming and showed us how important the supply chain is. And then also the geopolitical tensions and issues that are erupting now with the wars going on in certain areas of the world. So basically, the idea was to just kind of clarify it, have that certain clear baseline, and assign a clear responsibility of who is responsible for this. So the existence of dependencies on providers and customers, I've already kind of mentioned, but this was the COVID thing, right? At that point, we saw how critically fragile and reliant we are on certain things, right? Because I remember my clients, when we said like, wow, you got to work from home, you don't have computers. They said like, it's no problem. We'll just buy notebooks. But guess what? COVID first started in China, and China was the major supplier and manufacturer of all the notebooks, so nobody could get one. And this made it clear that like, oh, so supply chain is very dangerous. Also, a lot of cybersecurity accidents now are showing up where basically the entry point is not within the organization, it's within the third-party supplier who is connected to the organization, because the hackers are smart. They know that why would I attack somebody who's investing a lot to make sure security is functioning when I can find the weak link and come through that. You know, it's kind of like the whole strength of the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Obviously, there's digital incidents that affect the entire ecosystem of our organization, because we've gone through the rapid digitalization. And I mean, if we had companies that we could say 15 years ago that if we turn down the power, no problem, we'll do things manually. Today, no matter what part of business you are in, if we shut off your IT, it's going to be very, very hard for you to do business, if not impossible. And then basically, as I said, Europe is recognizing this. So they basically have the digital systemic risk on the agenda. And this is also while the cybersecurity incident numbers keep rising, and because the cybersecurity criminals are professionalizing. You know, I've just recently was listening to a nice story where they were asking, like, why is there so few cyber attacks from Christmas to New Year's? It's because it's become a business, and these people are on vacation at the time. So it kind of changed the platform a lot. Okay, if we move to the next slide. Basically, I wanted to share some key dates. Now, as I said, articles mentioned just to help you find it, because the whole directive has 144 preambles, 46 articles, and 3 annexes. The articles are the ones that are applicable, but the preambles usually provide more information on the subject. So if the article is not clear enough, go to the preamble and it's going to explain something. So basically, what are the key dates? January 16, 2023, it's already in the effect. A lot of people didn't know that. However, as with any directive needs a national law to come into effect. This is why the deadline was set for 17 October 2024, where the member states will adopt and publish the measures necessary to comply with this directive. So they will pass a national law requiring certain security aspects. They will also provide the technical requirements for this. This is described in Article 41.1. Then 18 October, a day after, all these measures apply for all the subject entities. But there's an interesting catch, because we also have a date of 17 April 2025, half a year later, where we say, like, all the countries need to establish a list of essential important entities. So basically, we're just going to figure out who these subjects are half a year later. Why is that? So basically, this is due to a transition period, because this directive introduces a lot of new requirements for subject entities. So they wanted to do a little grace time. However, within this time, this is also the directive that will require self-recognition. So basically, companies will have to self-recognize. But we've also, I can speak, at least for Slovenia, we're very closely working with the inspection agency who's going to do the checking of compliance. And they said, like, if you self-assess that you don't fall within this, and you should, it's going to be not just everything is going to apply to you, but you're going to go through a penalty of, it's not like testifying, but of misrepresenting, misassessing, right? Another thing that I wanted to point out is that, as I said, Europe is doing all these directives and all these movements. So this directive is just one of the many that's closely linked with other directives and acts that are coming out. Now, there's multiple coming out in EU. There's the AI Act. There's the, Digital Markets Act. But the whole point is the two that are really closely connected, because they cover kind of the same topics, are the Critical Entities Resilience Directive, called SIR, and Digital Operations Resilience Act, DORA, which is going to be applicable for financial industry specifically. Now, I have a little segment on aligning that, and at the end, so I'm going to move forward and then continue with this information a little later. So who does it actually apply to? This is the critical question. Well, first of all, it applies to large organizations, large being those who have more than 250 employees and more than 50 million in revenue. Those that fall within the sectors that we will mention in the next slide will fall under the essential entities, where the scrutiny is going to be the highest. The medium-sized organization that are over 50 employees and over 10 million in revenue will fall under important entities. There's also a talk about the small and micro organization. Now, this is tricky. They generally should not be included, but they can be, and it can be a government decision. So this will be decided at the national level of each country. And it's going to be based on the fact if they play a certain key role in the society or in the economic situation, or because they perform a specific critical function for the state. Let's say they're the only ones who provide something. So in those cases, even if you're small and micro, if you don't reach 50 employees and less than 10 million in revenue, you will be subject to NIS2. Then there's another specialty, qualified trust service providers, TLDs, so top-level domain registries, DNS, domain name services providers, providers of public electronic communication networks, publicly available electronic communication systems. This will all be within essential entities. And it's actually funny because some of the DNS service providers that I know actually have 3 people employed. So they are super small, super micro. They will go into the highest ranking bracket because European Union sees this as a critical infrastructure thing. And if the security is not okay here, this can seriously injure or let's say damage the normal operation of any member state. And then public administration. Public administration is also considered to be essential entities, but this is except for those that are carrying out their activities in the field of national security, public security, defense, law enforcement, prevention, investigation, detection. So basically your military, army, police, and similar entities. Okay. If we move on to who is actually going to be applicable to. So this slide has a lot of content. So I just kind of wanted to guide you through this. Why am I using 2 different colors to explain things? It's just because everything that is blue is supposed to show you what is new compared to NIS1. So those things that are in blue were not included in NIS1, and this is how it was expanded now. So this is one thing. And then, as I mentioned, there's essential entities and important entities. The important thing to distinguish here is not just which segment they are in, but what it will entail is that they will most likely have different levels of supervision and penalties. The government agencies like to talk about ex post and ex ante, meaning that basically the essential entities are going to be constantly reviewed. They will have high requirements. They will need to have regular audits, and basically the inspectors will come and audit on a certain periodic timetable. The important entities are generally going to be required to self-regulate, to do those audits, to submit certain information, but the inspection will only come in the case that they have a clear and distinguished, how would I say, suspicion of this agency or this organization not following the rules of NIS2, or whenever there's going to be a certain incident that's going to be public, they've assured me that that's going to be the trigger point where they will come. Basically, as I've mentioned before, the size of the organization will be key in determining where the subject falls in the sense of how important it is, how essential. So it's a combination matrix. A lot of countries actually have a questionnaire available where you can go online and you can just fill out the questionnaire, and it's going to give you an approximation of saying like, hey, we consider you to be part of it, and you are most likely going to be an essential entity, or you're most likely going to be an important entity. Right. Yeah, that's how much I have on this slide. I put a little more information here just so you can read the different areas that you can be included. But as I said, the directive has annexes 1 and 2 that specify specifically. So if anybody really wants to go in that depth, that's where they can do it. Okay, now we come to the understanding part. This is where I wanted to give you a little leeway and help you out a little bit. So you don't have to read everything because I already did multiple times. So what are the key things that are interesting to organizations? Why am I pointing out just a few articles and a few preambles? Well, because the directive is talking to everyone. So it's talking to the member states in some points. It's actually talking to the regulators in some points. There's different entities that they are addressing. So I wanted to kind of make clear that you, on the side of the organizations, what's going to be interesting and important for you. I've tried to include the whole text of a certain area, but I've tried to bold out the areas that are important. So I'm going to guide you through. We're not going to read through everything, just kind of pointing out the key messages and the key outtakes that are important for you. So the first one that I found interesting is the preamble 83. It talks about outsourcing. This was a question that I've had some of our clients ask us, because they said like, well, but we don't really control this. We have a lot of things in the cloud, or somebody else is maintaining our network and information systems, or we're outsourcing. The whole point is this preamble explains that the cybersecurity risk management measures. So making sure that your risk is being addressed, and all the reporting obligations on letting people know if an incident is going on, the appropriate authorities, obviously. This is regardless of whether you maintain your network or information systems internally or outsource. So basically, it's kind of like with some other stuff in cybersecurity world where, yes, you can have insurance, you can transfer responsibility in a sense of financial, but the ultimate responsibility always lies within you. You know, if they hack your organization and you say like, wow, yeah, I mean, the data from our customers got out. But the fact is that the data from our customers was actually managed by a third-party supplier of ours. So you should point at them. They will say like, we trusted you. You were the company that we worked with. And the regulator's also not going to let you off the hook. This is why they want the whole supply chain covered, because that's going to be your obligation. You have to guarantee that whoever is your critical supplier will follow the same rules, because ultimately the cybersecurity risk management measures and the reporting obligations will stay with the companies, with the organizations. The second one I wanted to point out is the preamble 125. Now, I've mentioned at this moment, member states are still drafting or novellating the laws or doing some intersector alignment, but basically they all are supposed to pass the law by 17 October 2024. And that means that there might be different technical requirements required for one state and for the other state. They do have some leeway. The baseline is set, the minimum requirements are supposed to be the same, but member states are encouraged that if they want more security, you can definitely go with it. So why I was pointing out the competence of supervisors here, because it's not going to be really important to you guys. You guys are not going to supervise. You guys are going to be answering to the supervisors. These are going to be your inspectors. But it is hinting that this will be a technical requirement, that this is not going to be just a check off of like, hey, is there a policy? I've had questions, people asking me like, we have ISO 27001 certification. Are we okay? Do we just say like, hey, we're certified, you guys don't have any work here? It's not going to be that level. I know some ISO certifications require in-depth view, but I've also seen some ISO certifications being awarded mostly based on the documentation. So basically, if you have the policies, they will be like, yep, check mark, move on. So this, it's saying that the supervision will need to include the identification of weaknesses in both databases, hardware, firewalls, encryptions, and networks, and they will need to include specialists who can do this. That is giving us a good indication that probably this is going to be a technical thing and not just like a checkmark sort of audit or review, right? But as I said, again, this will vary country to country. Okay, now we're going to come to the articles. This is where the main things are, right? The articles are the ones that define. So the first one that I wanted to point out is Article 4, Sector-Specific Union Legal Acts. Now, I've mentioned before DORA, I've mentioned SER. So I've had some questions of like, hey, DORA is going to apply to us. Does that mean NIS2 applies to us as well? Well, no, but kind of. Why am I giving you such a vague answer? Is because NIS2 says, hey, if you have a sector-specific legislation that will address you specifically, follow that legislation. You don't have to follow NIS2. Where these requirements will be at least equivalent in effect of the obligations laid down in the directive. So basically, if you are assuring at least this minimum, you're good to go. So there's no way of getting out. If you are in the industry, that's why I try to say this will be applicable to you. You can just say like, well, I'm going to follow DORA, and DORA is aligning with NIS2. So you have to do just a little gap analysis if there's anything there. But like, basically, you can follow as long as you guarantee this. And also, if there's a sector-specific act, DORA is considered a sector-specific union legal act. If it doesn't cover all the entities in the sector, all those who are out of scope of DORA will fall under NIS2. So basically, this is just trying to tell you that you have to have certain approach to this. You have to take it into account. You're not off the hook if you're somewhere else. As you can see in point 2, cybersecurity risk measurement measures are at least equivalent. This is the requirement. So they will want that as the baseline standard. Okay, if we move to the next slide, there's going to be Article 20. This one is important. Why? And people from US will identify with this more. People in Europe say this is new to them. So basically, here is the management bodies of these important entities will approve the cybersecurity risk management measures taken by those entities, oversee the implementation, and they will be the ones liable for any infringements by the entities of that article. So basically, what they did is they've looked at US, and AICPA even years ago said like, hey, you know, it's no longer good for us that we ask for cybersecurity assessments and then we get an assessment from the CISO, and if something goes wrong, the CIO, the CEO, sorry, of the company will usually point to the technical guys and say like, well, that's their problem. They said it, it's not my thing, right? So AICPA said like, no, we now want to have a management statement on where we are. And this is what Europe is doing now. They've learned that tone at the top is important. So they're moving the responsibility to the actual management of the company, right? So this is your boards, this is your supervisory boards. Those people are going to be critical and the most essential to provide these services and know what's going on. It will no longer be, they will no longer be able to delegate to the security level staff. The second one is also that members of these management bodies will need to have some training. They will need to understand cybersecurity. They will need to have cybersecurity risk knowledge, which means that either we will have to train them, and obviously the wish is to also offer the similar training to their employees on some sort of periodic basis. But it also means that we might see an uptick of people with IT security knowledge being included in the leadership, just because this will be where the ultimate responsibility will lie. Now, next article is going to be the most critical one. This one is the most explaining of what is actually going on here. So it's talking about cybersecurity risk management measures. Basically, what it says is what they expect you to do is be smart about it. This is not the logic of like, hey, just apply everything, throw everything at this enemy. No, you have to have appropriate technical, operational, organizational measures to manage the risk posed by the security. So how would we know that we apply an appropriate level? Because even below it says, shall ensure a level of security of network information system appropriate to the risk posed, right? So basically what they will expect you to do is to do a smart assessment, which usually goes through a few steps. I'll talk about it later when I give my recommendations on how to apply this. But basically, they will not say just like, hey, I need a copy-paste approach where everybody is doing the same thing. You are allowed some versatility and some flexibility in this, but the main story is going to be basically you need to know what is most risky for you. You need to know what is not that risky for you, and then decide based on that to apply some sort of appropriate proportionate level. Okay, the second portion or paragraph of the article is where we define what is going to be in scope. So this is a very high level. Keep in mind, there's going to be technical standards coming up that are going to explain, but these are the areas that are going to be included. So obviously we start with policies on risk analyzing, information system security. That's kind of the baseline that ISO, everybody starts with a policy. You know, as an auditor, you know, if you ever had an auditor come over, our first question is always, can we see the policy, right? Then it's incident handling. It needs to be taken care of because we want you to be able to respond to an incident when it occurs. Business continuity, such as backup management, disaster recovery, crisis management. This is all critical because the main idea is obviously resilience, making sure that the companies can operate even when under attack or where security issues are arising. Supply chain security, I've mentioned, critical, becoming more and more critical with every year because we see that this is now the weak link usually. Then it's vulnerability handling and disclosure. It's the policies and procedures to assess the effectiveness of these cybersecurity risk management measures, which tells you you will have to be diligent. It's not enough to just create a policy. You will have to monitor it and assess it regularly. Then there's the general hygiene practices of cybersecurity and cybersecurity training. There's the use of cryptography. This is new, was not in NIS1, but is now in NIS2. And this might be even an interesting topic now with the talks of quantum computing and the whole cryptography world being under massive pressure to completely change. We have human resources security and access control policies and asset management, and the use of multi-factor authentication, which helps also secure voice, video, text communications. So yeah, the whole fact of this multi-factor authentication, I think it's going to go strong where like your third-party providers will all have to do this. So this is not going to be maybe convenient for people. It's going to add an extra layer, but most of these cyber hacks that happen come from this part being missing. So I assume this is going to be a default standard pretty soon. Okay. Next article that's important for you guys is going to be reporting obligations. So basically, you will need to notify without undue delay the CIRT. This is the National Incident Response Team, right? In Slovenia, the CIRT is also the CERT team. This depends on the different countries, but the main facts that I just wanted to point out in bold before is everything needs to be reported to without undue delay, and then in any event within 24 hours of becoming aware of the significant incident, you need to issue an early warning, which means you don't know what's going on yet, but you need to let them know like, hey, something's going on, we're investigating. This is within 24 hours. Within 72 hours, meaning within 3 days of becoming aware of this incident, you should prepare an incident notification where you will base information on the early warning, kind of fill it out with additional information, and therefore continue with that. And then a final report should be done no later than 1 month after the submission of the incident notification. But there are some exceptions. If this is a live thing, if you are going to have some issues, or if you will still be dealing with the incident or something, they will give you some leeway. It's not going to be that difficult, but it's important to understand this because the reporting requirement is critical. Your local CIRT will be collecting this data. They will be reporting to ENISA to kind of gather information from all the member states. The idea is to anonymize. It's not to penalize anyone or to blacklist somebody, but more like to see trends, to see what is happening somewhere, and share this information within the whole network to make sure that every entity can contribute and can have some support and can get some information ahead of time, maybe prepare for something that's about to happen, right? With Article 23, I've kind of like finished. I'm going to mention just a few more, maybe if you guys are interesting. So Article 26 might be interesting for those companies that operate in multiple territories. This is especially for the telco providers or stuff, because it's going to define the jurisdiction and territoriality of where you're going to be. Article 30 is about the voluntary notification of relevant information. So not just what you are obliged to report, but basically what you can share, because the idea of the national CERTs is that they will help you deal with this for free. They will transfer the knowledge and help the state be more secure. And then there's Article 32 and 33, which is going to explain what the supervisory and enforcement measures will be in relation to whether you're an essential or an important entity. I should point out that the penalties are skyrocketing. I can tell you that in Slovenia, for NIS1, our essential entities could be penalized 50,000 euros. Under NIS2, that maximum now went to 10 million. So you can imagine this is a huge, huge jump. Okay, now last slide from my side. Just wanted to give you my personal view, because I've not only talked to a lot of clients, we've already done an exercise where we were trying to predict. As I said, the technical standards are not out yet, but we were using the new ISO framework to kind of frame the controls and test and see where it's going. But basically, what are the key things that I've learned or I want to share? The first one is that obviously national legislation will be key for all the in-scope entities. And it will still probably differ slightly between member states, but the idea is not to have that much of a difference that we used to have before. The second thing is that all the organizations should look for an appropriate framework that not only tries to cover the requirements of the directive, but also the needs of the organization. There are multiple frameworks outside. The only thing that I always tell my clients is like, please do not reinvent the wheel. You have so many useful time-proven, practice-proven frameworks that have developed over years. So use something that is close to you. If you're an ISO certified organization, go with ISO. If you guys are relying on COBIT, try with COBIT. You know, if you're a NIST organization, try to compensate with NIST. And obviously a gap analysis will tell you if there's certain areas that you would have to add to the normal stuff that you would cover. Then look for synergies with existing and forthcoming regulations because they can be exploited, right? It doesn't make sense for you to do every legislation to separately. Try to find what are the common grounds because they are being aligned, and you will have a much easier work doing that. Then regular reviews, regular security audits. This is probably going to be a must. So if you're in the US market, you're probably used to SOC reports already. In Europe, ISA reports are a little more rare. I see them, but I think this is the direction where organizations are going to have to start going, just because the amount of different audits and reviews from all these different clients and all these interested parties is going to be overwhelming. I already have clients that complain to me that they do pretty much like 2 audits per month, meaning 24 audits per year, which means you practically have to have 6 people full-time employed just to serve the auditors who are coming with new ideas. So this is something to keep in mind, that like this could probably help you satisfy multiple requirements in one report with one audit. It's going to be extensive, but still. Then obviously now some recommendations on how to approach this. So this is not how you should do it, but this is how I would proceed, right? So first of all, you obviously want to do a gap analysis. And if you don't think like you're able to do this, find a consultant who can. Basically, they will point out where you are right now, where you should be, and then you can start addressing these gaps. Now, it's advisable, the way you would do it is like you would start with this whole cyber risk assessment, going through the identification, analysis, and the evaluation of the risks. Obviously, another critical part is you have to have an IT assets register. I see so many clients that don't have a full register, or they have it scattered around in different areas. The one that the people in accounting lead for, for your equipment and stuff is usually not adequate, because you want to know what you have and how impactful it is. Once you have the register and you have the risk assessment, you do a business impact analysis, and this can then help you address business continuity and disaster recovery. People ask me, do I have to do a BIA? Can I just have business continuity and disaster recovery? Yes, sure, you can. But I can tell you that the Slovenian regulator is very firm on this. They expect a BIA because they state, and I agree with them, that if you just apply business continuity and disaster recovery in general, it's just going to go, you're not going to be protecting your assets efficiently. You might have some assets underprotected based on criticality and some overprotected. Then the whole thing is that basically we have a few areas that are usually typical. This is my personal view, what I see in clients being low or like a risky area. So one is managing cyber risks by the top boards. This is usually delegated down to the cybersecurity people. The incident reporting is usually lacking. Supply chain security is kind of a new concept that some have adapted, some are completely clueless about. And the cybersecurity awareness programs that would work to make sure that everybody is kind of in line of what is happening, what they should think about. My other recommendation would be just generally that you have to understand that the remediation of the situation preparation, it requires a certain period of time. So I would advise everybody to start early, or if not immediately. Just try to guess where you are, try to see where you are, because once it goes into effect, things are going to start coming down fast. But the main thing, the main outtake of all this is the EU is generally showing attention to establishing a higher level of cybersecurity and resilience within its own organizations. There are going to be new legislations, new directives, acts coming up. And the main focus will be on ensuring business continuity. So make sure these areas are addressed. And with that in mind, I will transfer to my colleagues from HYCU, where they can tell you a little bit more about how they can help you address business continuity.
Thank you so much, Uroš. We'll have a couple of questions toward the end. So if you have
Oh,
any questions for Uroš, we're going to cover them at the end. One thing I wanted to mention too is how valuable this was. Uroš has gone through hundreds and hundreds of statements and pages to be able to condense this into a 30-minute discussion for you. So you will have this entire breakdown on video. This is something that you can review with your colleagues. And now that we're transitioning over to really focusing on a segment within NIS2 on cybersecurity, on resilience, and on business continuity, we want to address a little bit of the gray area and talk exactly about your role when it comes to NIS2 and SaaS applications. Uroš very clearly talked about supply chain and being able to harden the entire ecosystem versus transferring risk. And SaaS is one of those interesting murky areas, and we're going to really focus on Atlassian Cloud and define exactly what the responsibility is and what that applies to from a NIS2 perspective. So let's think about what the responsibility of Atlassian Cloud. There's so many conversations that we have, and people go, well, Andy, if I have paid for a cloud service, I no longer host it on my data center. I did download a server and I don't maintain it. Why am I responsible? And that's a huge myth within the world of SaaS. It's not just Atlassian, it's Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, you name it. And when you actually go through, review the documentation, review the statements, legal and technical from Atlassian and any other SaaS provider, you start to see the same framework evolve, which is the shared responsibility model. And what you can see in the shared responsibility model here is Atlassian takes responsibility for the system level. Hey, we're going to keep this available for you. We want to make sure that you can access the service, but the customer, the user, the tenant yourself, your organization is responsible for the users, the policy, the compliance, and the information. This is a very, very important component. But to provide a little bit better of an analogy, something that this is my dumb analogy for this is think of Atlassian as a garage. And Uroš is going out on a Friday in Ljubljana, and he wants to park his car. Uroš expects that when he parks his car, that the garage allows him to park, that he pays, that he has access, that the lights are on, and he can consume that service. But if he leaves his window down and somebody steals his laptop or scratches his car, the garage has no responsibility for that. It is Uroš's responsibility to protect his car, to make sure that the stuff inside of his car is explicitly protected. That is a responsibility between the garage and the car owner. The same thing applies to SaaS. Atlassian is a system. Atlassian is responsible for making sure that the system is available, but you are responsible for the contents of your vehicle, aka your data, your compliance, your insurance. And that is a critical component to understand. But let's dive in a little bit more. In the same documentation that Atlassian provides, you actually see an explicit breakdown bulleted about your role as an organization, your role as an Atlassian Cloud customer. And the first thing that we see is that compliance is still your responsibility. Atlassian has their own compliance that they have to attain, but you as a customer, especially if you're going to be an essential important entity in NIS2 or in DORA or anything else, even within the US and healthcare and financial services, you need to make sure that you understand your risk profile, your requirements, and that you're making sure that you're meeting your compliance, not relying on Atlassian meeting compliance. As Uroš mentioned, this is about the entire supply chain. And then the next component is you are responsible for backup and recovery. Now, Atlassian says, yes, we do backups, but keep in mind, these are backups at the system level. If there's a global outage, if there is a ransomware attack on Atlassian, they need to have backups, they need to have replication in order to recover from that. But remember, that's the entire garage. But if something happens to the car, your data, you are responsible for backup and recovery. That's why you have insurance on your car. It's the same principle. So Atlassian explicitly mentions that you have to create backups of your own data. That's why this is so important to understand in the context of backup and recovery. So what we've put together is a little bit of a checklist. As Uroš mentioned, it's extremely important to start early. Because you don't understand the technical requirements that are coming, but we've created this checklist that is focused explicitly on what are the baseline things that you can do today to already be in a good place for when these directives are finalized as well, and it's done at the country level. Now, I took this sample from the NIS2 directive as well, and they talk about having a plan for business operations after security incident, really talking about backups, recovery, and business continuity. Here are a couple of things that we recommend at minimum. Remember, there will be more technical requirements coming out, but at minimum, as an Atlassian Cloud customer and any other SaaS that you're using, you have to schedule some form of backup. We always recommend as a best practice, daily backups. But the critical component here is that these are automated. When you are scripting, there's a chance of error, there's human error involved as well, and it's not manageable across several applications. When you automate your backups, you have something that's checked off there and that you can be compliant. The other thing, though, is especially from an auditing perspective, you always want to keep logs and reporting on your backup jobs. Did we complete the backup? At what time did this happen? Who completed the backup? This will all be very, very critical in case of an audit. And another fundamental best practice is being able to keep copies of that data off-site. This is going to be critical to make sure you meet certain requirements as well. One thing that we always explain to our customers is also the need for immutable copies. What does this actually mean? Well, this is a disconnected ransomware proof copy of your data. If there is a direct attack on your organization or supply chain attack, you always have a copy of that data outside of Atlassian, outside of the SaaS provider. But most importantly, you do not have a backup if you're not testing your recovery. You have to regularly test recovery and always keep documentation, not only on how it performed, but also on who has access, what are the regulations that you're following. It's always important. And we'll make sure to provide this checklist for you. And the last thing I'll mention too is make sure that you also secure and harden your backup infrastructure, that you have monitoring, that you know who has access and who is doing what when it comes to backup. But just for the next 5 minutes, I want to cover a little bit of how HYCU can help you today, specifically to not only Atlassian Cloud, but any other SaaS application that will fall under this. And we're going to focus on a couple of things. The first one will be around actual discovery, then protection, and then recovery of the data itself. And we're going to use Jira as an example, but there's broad support across the board. The first thing that we'll mention, and this is a service that HYCU offers, a lot of organizations, and Uroš probably has seen this during his auditing process, do not have complete visibility into the applications that their organization is using. Yes, maybe within IT, somebody understands what they're using, but across the entire organization, it might be difficult to know who's using what, even if it's all registered on the SSO directory. So what HYCU has delivered, and this is a free service for anybody on this call, is a full SaaS assessment, a full SaaS visibility assessment that not only visualizes, as long as you're an Okta or Azure AD or Entra ID user, you will see a list of the total sources, the total applications within your organization. They will be organized by department or category. So you can take an organized approach to establish and identify risk. But the most important part here, it exposes any application that does not have native backup and recovery or offsite data retention. And what this explicitly means is that if that is a red X and you see that shield over box, this means that you are not protecting that application. And during an audit, you cannot show that you can perform backup and recovery for this. And this will do this across your entire organization, not just your IT applications. And most importantly, though, it allows you to do something about the problem. It allows you to immediately go and protect these applications. Now, how does that actually work? How do you deliver backup policies that can meet the needs that will be established within NIS2? The first thing is you want to be able to standardize. And with HYCU, whether it's Jira, whether it's JSM, Confluence, or even services outside of Atlassian, you're going to be able to create policies that meet your needs, that meet your data needs, whether it's because of internal policies or because of government policies as well. And what you're able to do is first choose the backup frequency. Do I want my backups every hour because this is a very important project, or do I want my backups once a day, or is it a weekly time? Now, very critical in the context of financial and healthcare is also the data retention period. For example, in the US, certain organizations have to meet data retention requirements of 7 years. With HYCU, you're able to define all of this within your policy. But most importantly, this policy, once assigned, will work in perpetuity, 24/7. You have to go and disable it yourself for it to stop working. So what does this mean? Well, once you assign a daily backup of your Jira or your Confluence, it will always be running. And what this means is in case of an audit, in case of an incident, you know there's always a point in time to recover from. This is a critical, but this is also bare minimum requirements to be able to meet these two. One thing that I really want to talk about as well, though, is where does the data go? Uroš also mentioned a focus on securing the supply chain. Well, if you're sending your backups to yet another third party, you're now introducing a new attack vector, a new risk profile, which is why at HYCU, from a design perspective, we take security, we take data protection, but we take data sovereignty very, very, very seriously. And that's why you will see that HYCU will never store your backups. What we do is we actually give you an ability to store the backups in your storage, in your control, according to your settings. And how does that work? Well, all HYCU does is you connect to Atlassian Cloud via API token. And we are a highway. Think of it as an encrypted highway from Atlassian Cloud to your storage. I'm using AWS here as an example, but we use other S3 compatible storage like Google Cloud Storage, Wasabi, and etc. But from a security perspective, especially in the context of NIS2, all data that we move is encrypted at rest and in flight. Then it is stored in your account. As a customer, as an AWS or a Google Cloud user, HYCU does not store these backups. This is a critical requirement in these days. And then that means that you allow to control the data residency as well. Whether there's a specific zone, a specific country that you need to keep your data, you have complete control to do so. And of course, you have complete control of the security settings, your IAM policies, etc. And of course, that data is stored in object storage, which means that you have the choice of not only the storage tier, you can optimize for cost, you can optimize for SLAs, or you can even enable immutable backups in case of an attack. The goal here is that you're able to protect this data, that you're able to store it in your control, and that it's always going to be recoverable. Once again, this is not going to be this directive about simply checking the box. These will be technical assessments with clear requirements, not only around backup, but around recovery itself. Can you recover? Can you prove the recovery? And that's why with HYCU, once again, we don't store the backups. It comes from your copies, your S3 buckets or whatever storage target you're using. You define where the data is, and then you can recover from it, whether it's at the project level or specific issues, specific attachments, configurations within Jira, or any other of the Atlassian applications that we protect. You always have the ability to recover. And what this means here is that not only can you do so for the good of the business, but you can also prove recovery in case of an audit as well. And the last thing that I'll mention too is documentation is critical. Logging is critical. We know that there's MFA requirements, and because of all of these different areas within the directive and the articles, HYCU is always MFA enabled. You have 24/7 logging and tracking. Every single event, every policy, every activity, new users, anything is fully logged and fully tracked. You have documentation of all of this, and you always have notifications in case of your backup status, your compliance status. And ultimately, too, within the organization, you control who has what access, full role-based access control, from admin all the way down to restore operator, backup operator, and viewer. The point is, you have an enterprise level backup and recovery service that is fully automated, but is built for Atlassian Cloud that you can prove recovery, prove backups, and meet business continuity requirements. Now, with that being said, it's not just Atlassian Cloud that you're using within your organization. And with HYCU, we already protect Jira, we protect Confluence, JSM, work management, product discovery, Trello, and very soon we're also releasing coverage for Bitbucket. But it's also every other SaaS application that your organization uses, whether it's in cooperation with Atlassian, things like Miro and GitHub, Circle CI, or simply just other services required by the business. HYCU protects the most in the world. We have the largest coverage of SaaS applications, not only in Atlassian, but outside as well. And of course, we also protect your critical infrastructure. I'm talking virtual infrastructure, cloud infrastructure as well, all from one place. What does this actually do? Well, it allows you to standardize and understand exactly where you are as an organization when it comes to backup, when it comes to recovery, and when it comes to business continuity. So with that being said, I know that we've kind of spent the entire hour. It's a very dense topic, and we appreciate your patience, but it's very, very critical that we discuss this. I'm going to mention a couple of last items before we move on to Q&A. So one thing that I want to mention here is Uroš is giving us an incredible breakdown, but of course there are going to be more questions. Of course, you might require more guidance. So I've included here his information where to go to mazars.si or simply to email Uroš directly. And Uroš, I have a couple of questions for you that we'll go through. But one thing that I'll mention too here is the SaaS Discovery I showed you is free. We're going to be posting, if you look on the chat, there will be links to this as well. You simply register and you can have free access to our graph. And we could also provide you a demo, exactly how HYCU is able to protect Atlassian Cloud and any other service that might be of interest for you. Now, with that, let's actually move over to some of the questions. Now, Uroš, I think there's one that already came up, and it's, what is the US equivalent to NIS, if this exists?
So, to my knowledge, there's not a requirement like this existing in the sense of that this will be mandatory at this moment. I mean, I've mentioned before AICPA, and as part of SOX, there are certain management, statement management assertions that need to be followed. I know there's a SOC for cybersecurity developed, but it's not mandatory, so that makes it different. Other than that, like that is the framework that is addressing the same issues.
Uroš, quick question for you as well. What if you're a multinational US organization that has operating entities in the EU? What's the relationship with NIS2 there?
So that's why I said was mentioning some other articles like the 26, where it's very important to define which member state you're going to be applicable with, because we have organizations who do this. Now, it's like with DORA or with NIS is like also if you are dealing with European entities or if you are providing a critical service for them, you might be applicable just because they will be applicable to it, right? So there is that sort of a direction. Now, which country is going to be the predominant one is usually decided based on where the majority of your business is going to be. As I said, there's expected additional explanation of this topic, but as I mentioned before, I think this is the main. The thing that's going to define this is going to be Article 26, which is talking about that jurisdiction and territoriality, because in some cases we'll also see like telecom communicators who are operating both in Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia. So it's going to be difficult to determine. There are going to be some helpful guidelines in there, but they're very specific. So I can't talk in general because it's going to be case by case.
No, thank you for that. No, the last question I had for you as well, and this is my personal curiosity, is there a difference now in the accountability? And I know that you mentioned that the C-level, the board will be held accountable. But in the past, it seems like organizations would pay fines and they would move on. Has there been any type of change in personal accountability versus company accountability?
So this is specifically what they're doing by saying the boards are now responsible. So obviously, I know that the first reaction was very beneficial in Slovenia, was beneficial for insurances because the liability insurances went up, and people were more interested in that. But the fact of the matter is like they now with this, I think the supervisory boards and the boards are becoming more aware that this is no longer a problem that they can push down. You know, I come from the security background, which means basically I've listened to my whole life how you guys constantly complicate. You always see some threats that are not there. Now we're kind of getting that voice through this. So accountability is going to be major. There's not going to be a leeway from this. And we've already seen that like in cases of some disasters, this can also be politically motivated. So to keep that in mind, it's based on the countries. But like an incident can cause boards to have to resign, which means the company is holding them responsible. And this is why it's being taken seriously, because obviously the boards do not want this.
No, absolutely. And I think what we've learned from here is that the consequences are serious. There's personal accountability. The fines are serious. But we're also entering a very dangerous world with data all over the place. Supply chains are exposed. There's a reason why this is happening, and we all have to take this very, very seriously.
And you might be excluded from some good business if you are not following this. You know, this is kind of like the hygienic thing that some of your partners are going to be requiring from you, because they're going to be saying like, hey, I have such a huge responsibility to ensure this. If you guys are not in line with this, I don't want to do work with you guys. So it might be even kind of like a competitive advantage if you have this taken care of.
No, this makes total sense. So I think Uroš and I can talk about this the entire day, the implication of AI and cryptography and everything, but I know that we all have other meetings to go to. But I want to thank you all for your time, for your attention. I want to thank Uroš as well for this breakdown of a very, very complex problem. If you have any other questions, please email us. You will see a full email with the recording and the slides. This has been incredibly valuable, and even I've learned a lot. So thank you so much, Uroš, and thank you for everyone who attended.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.